A colleague of Carson's once walked into his NBC office and told him he'd beat him up if he didn't stop making fun of him. One guest screamed at Carson's cue card man and never appeared on the show again. And another was Johnny Carson's least favorite guest despite being one of his childhood idols. These weren't guests who just crossed the line. According to Carson, they burned the entire bridge. These are the 8 most disrespectful celebrities that ever appeared on The Tonight Show. Stay until the end. The controversies you'll hear will make you never look at these celebrities the same way again. Number 1. Charles Grodin. Charles Grodin was genuinely hostile and combative during his appearances, and it wasn't an act. His whole approach was being bored, annoyed, and genuinely antagonistic toward Carson and other talk show hosts. He'd sit down and immediately start complaining, saying that Carson did not actually care about his guests, that the questions were superficial, and that Johnny wasn't really listening. He would question Carson's sincerity right to his face on live TV.
Are you interested in anything at all?
Absolutely, that's why I'm asking.
No,
yes.
no, you're not really. Is there anything in the world that you really, do you lie awake at night and worry about anything that doesn't have to do with the show or yourself?
Yes, I can care about the human condition.
Come on, like what?
Don't you know what the human condition means?
Yeah, but what do you care about the human condition? You've reduced the entire world situation, Iraq and everything, to an opening monologue.
He would push back in ways that were genuinely rude and disrespectful. Modern write-ups describe Grodin's behavior as deliberately antagonistic across multiple talk shows, with the pattern being consistent. Grodin would sigh heavily before answering, like he was being forced to participate in the world's most tedious conversation. He would look directly at the camera instead of at Johnny, as if appealing to the audience about how terrible this all was. He would interrupt Carson to complain about being interrupted, even though Johnny hadn't actually interrupted him.
I suppose the thing is to get it when you can.
Are you whispering again?
Oh, no, you said I'm whispering last time.
Yeah, you talk very softly for me. I don't know why.
Are you hearing me
This
right
is what
in?
you sound like.
Okay.
You're talking. You made a book. No.
Have you seen those little whisper things that people get who are just on the edge of going completely deaf, where you hear something? I'm going to get you
think
one
it's
of those.
me?
Yeah. I think you're losing it.
You know, when I tried to talk about my book in the hardcover, you said $18.95. You know, that's a lot of money for a book. And I said it's my whole life.
I thought it was. You remember those things, don't you?
Yes, I do.
I didn't know you were that sensitive. You actually remember that.
I'm so sensitive, I really can't answer a question from someone who's not interested in the question.
I'm very interested in the question. Now, what? It's all right. It's okay. I'm used to it.
No, this wasn't fake. This was Grodin's actual personality and approach to television appearances. What makes this complicated is that some people, including Carson, seemed to tolerate or even appreciate it. Johnny kept inviting him back despite his disrespect. But a significant chunk of the audience rightfully saw Grodin as an ungrateful jerk disrespecting the king of late night. Whether Grodin thought he was being clever or funny is unclear. But in 1980s America, acting like that toward Johnny Carson on national television was basically unheard of. Number 2. Wayne Newton. Wayne and Johnny had a brutal fight that went way beyond TV. In the mid-1980s, Newton beat out a Carson-connected group in a bid to buy the Aladdin Casino in Las Vegas. After that, Johnny started hitting Newton repeatedly in his monologue jokes. Not harmless roasts, but jokes implying that Newton was and effeminate, which in that era was not just edgy. It was genuinely damaging to someone's status in Hollywood. Newton said he tried to get the jokes stopped through NBC, but nobody would help him. The jokes kept coming night after night, so Wayne Newton decided to handle it himself. He soon went directly to Johnny's office at NBC and said this to his face.
I jumped in a car and I drove over to NBC, and I walked into his office, and he was there with his producer, and whom I had known for a lot of years. And so I said to his producer, "Would you excuse us, please?" I confronted him. I told him what my intentions were. He wouldn't get up, and so I smacked him.
You really hit him?
Yeah.
Wow. Like, how hard did you hit him?
Would you like to see?
No, I don't want to see. You really hit him, but...
I smacked him open-handed, you know.
Okay.
Because I was so fed up with it.
The tension in that room had to be unreal. And apparently Johnny backed down because the jokes stopped after that confrontation. Most of this happened off camera, but there was a libel suit against NBC afterward, and years of documented bitterness between the two men. Newton later went on Larry King Live and called Johnny Carson a mean-spirited human being on national television. The disrespect here is completely mutual. Carson publicly mocked Newton with jokes that crossed ethical lines. Newton responded with an in-person threat of violence. It's one of the ugliest feuds in Tonight Show history, and it shows a side of Carson that a lot of fans don't want to think about. Number 3. Bob Hope. Here's a shocking fact most old Tonight Show viewers don't know. Despite appearing constantly for decades, Bob Hope was Johnny Carson's least favorite guest. This comes from biographer Richard Zoglin, who had access to people close to Carson. Johnny privately said Hope was his worst guest, which is kinda heartbreaking when you think about it. The reason was not one big incident, but a pattern that drove everyone crazy. Bob Hope would show up with pre-written jokes already on cue cards and a list of product plugs for his specials and tours. Everything was scripted in advance. He barely interacted with Johnny during the actual interviews. It was less conversation and more Hope using Carson as an object while he delivered his material to the camera. Everything had to be planned because Bob would never go off script or engage in typical talk show conversation. This was the complete opposite of what made The Tonight Show feel alive. Carson built his show on spontaneity and real conversation. Hope treated it like a 1950s variety show where every word was rehearsed. Producers dreaded Hope's visits according to multiple accounts. They had to have the cue cards ready, know exactly which products Bob was plugging, and structure the entire segment around his needs instead of the show's format. To Johnny, that felt like subtle but real disrespect. Hope was using The Tonight Show as a personal billboard, ignoring Carson's style completely, treating him like a supporting player instead of the host. Viewers eventually sensed the stiffness in those segments. You can watch Hope's later appearances and really feel how different the energy is compared to other celebrities. Number 4. Jerry Lewis. Johnny effectively blacklisted Jerry Lewis from The Tonight Show forever. But the reason is darker than most viewers ever realized. Jerry was known throughout Hollywood for being difficult and verbally abusive toward crew members and other staff. But the specific incident that ended his Tonight Show appearances involved Carson's cue card man, a guy who had worked with Johnny for years. After one of his appearances, something went wrong with the monologue timing. Maybe the cue cards were out of order, maybe there was a technical issue, possibly Jerry himself screwed up a joke and wanted someone to blame. Whatever actually happened, Jerry screamed at Carson's cue card guy and just absolutely verbally abused him in front of the entire staff. He called him incompetent, berated him for the mistake, and humiliated him publicly in that way where everyone has to just stand there and watch it happen. When Johnny heard what he had done to one of his employees, that was it. No discussion, no second chance. Lewis was done. He never appeared on The Tonight Show again as long as Johnny was hosting. This is the kind of disrespect that actually mattered deeply to Carson in a way that other things did not. You could challenge Carson himself if you wanted or do comedy bits that made him uncomfortable. But if you mistreated his staff, if you abused the people who made the show work and flow properly, you were finished. The show could survive bad interviews, awkward moments, and unfunny guests. But cruelty to the crew was absolutely unforgivable in Carson's eyes. Number 5. Madonna. Madonna's September 1987 Tonight Show appearance was aggressively flirty in a way that felt less like playful talk and more like a calculated power move on live TV. To understand why this mattered, you need to understand the context of late-night television in the 1980s. The Tonight Show had very specific standards about what was acceptable on network television. There were boundaries that guests simply did not cross. Madonna walked onto the set and immediately started treating Johnny like a prop in her own performance. She sat on his desk instead of in the guest chair, leaned into heavy, explicit innuendo that went beyond what was normal for the show, and openly toyed with him in front of millions of viewers. And you could see Johnny Carson was not entirely comfortable with what was happening. What makes this historically significant is that it represented a generational clash playing out while live. Madonna was part of a new wave of pop stars in the MTV era who were deliberately provocative. Carson represented the old guard of television, where there were unspoken rules about decorum. There's a difference between being a fun, flirty guest who plays along with the format and basically staging a seduction. Madonna crossed that line deliberately and repeatedly. She was not there to have a conversation about her music. She was there to make Johnny part of her act whether he wanted to be or not. Carson handled it pretty well considering the circumstances. He played along and tried to redirect when things got too far. But you can watch that appearance and see moments where the control he normally has over the show is completely gone. Madonna took it from him and did it on purpose. She turned Johnny Carson into a supporting player without asking permission. Madonna was at the peak of her power in 1987. She was the biggest pop star in the world, and she used that appearance to demonstrate that she could walk onto anyone's show, including Johnny Carson's, and take control of it. This appearance is still studied today as an example of how celebrity power dynamics on television were shifting in the late 1980s. Number 6. Lola Falana. Lola Falana was a Tonight Show regular throughout the 1970s, appearing over a dozen times when she was the Queen of Vegas headlining sellout shows. She was using The Tonight Show to promote her residency, and then, suddenly, her invitation stopped. She went from frequent guest to never being on again with zero explanations. What makes this case particularly instructive is the practice of informal blacklisting in the 1970s television. There are different stories about what happened. One version says she spoke unusually bluntly about race and open bigotry during an appearance, catching Johnny Carson and NBC brass off guard by saying things on live TV that made executives uncomfortable, things that were true but not supposed to be said on a mainstream talk show in that era. This was the 1970s when discussions about discrimination on network television were carefully controlled, and that effectively ended her invitations. Another version claims she got on Johnny's bad side by defending Wayne Newton while Carson was hammering him with monologue jokes, making her collateral damage. What was the line she crossed exactly? Was it speaking too honestly about discrimination or defending someone Johnny had decided to target? Either way, it shows how carefully guests, especially black performers, had to navigate the politics of The Tonight Show in the 1970s. You could not just say whatever you wanted without consequences. There were unspoken rules about acceptable topics. These rules disproportionately affected performers of color who faced additional scrutiny about what they said on air. And if you broke those rules, if you made Carson or NBC uncomfortable, you stopped getting invited back, even if you were talented and popular. Lola Falana went from regular presence to being completely erased without anyone in an official capacity ever explaining why. Being disappeared without explanation or a chance to defend yourself. Her case remains one of the more controversial examples of how power and politics worked behind the scenes at The Tonight Show. Number 7. Chevy Chase. Chase has a long, well-documented reputation for being arrogant and abrasive throughout his career. Multiple retrospectives and former co-workers from SNL describe prejudice or demeaning comments and a toxic attitude that burned bridges everywhere. On The Tonight Show, the most infamous night was not even when Johnny Carson was hosting, but in 1979 when Chevy was guest hosting. This is significant because guest hosting The Tonight Show was considered one of the highest honors in comedy. It portrayed Carson trusted you enough to hand you his show for just a night. There were specific unwritten protocols about how to behave. During that 1979 appearance, Chase openly needled and mocked prop comic Gallagher in a way that was genuinely mean and borderline cruel. He made actress Barbara Bach visibly uncomfortable during her interview in that way where you can see someone trying to smile through awkwardness. Fans who watched that episode called Chase's guest hosting petty and almost bullying, like he was using Johnny's show to punch down at other guests for his own amusement. Carson himself reportedly did not think much of Chevy Chase's ad-lib skills, which adds to the sense that Chevy fundamentally disrespected the house rules. What makes this instructive is understanding what guest hosting was supposed to accomplish. There was a specific way you were supposed to behave. You played along with the format that Carson had perfected, made everyone around you look good, created an atmosphere where everyone could be funny. The best guest hosts understood they were temporary caretakers of something valuable. Chase did the opposite. He used the platform to show off and put other people down. And you can bet Johnny Carson noticed and remembered. Chase never became a Tonight Show regular. He would appear occasionally, but there was never that warmth or chemistry between him and Carson. The relationship was professional and distant at best. Chase was never trusted to guest host again after that 1979 disaster. This case study shows how Carson used guest hosting opportunities as tests to see who understood and respected what he had built versus who would abuse the privilege. Number 8. Joan Rivers. On air, Joan Rivers was one of Johnny's sharpest, funniest, most beloved guests and guest hosts. She was his hand-picked protege, the person he trusted to fill in when he was on vacation. They had chemistry and what looked like real friendship. And then, in 1986, Joan took a $10 million deal with Fox to host her own competing late-night show. To understand why this was such a massive betrayal, you need to understand the context of late-night television in the 1980s. The Tonight Show had virtually no competition. Carson dominated late night for decades. When Fox launched The Late Show starring Joan Rivers, it was a direct attack on Carson's monopoly led by someone Johnny had personally mentored. Joan says she called Johnny to tell him before it became public. She got him on the phone, started to explain, and he hung up on her, just hung up mid-sentence, and Johnny Carson never spoke to Joan Rivers again. not once for the rest of his life. NBC treated Rivers as persona non grata, and she was pulled from The Tonight Show for decades. From Carson's side, this was massive professional betrayal. By making Joan a regular guest host, Carson had essentially groomed her as a potential successor. From a lot of viewers' side, Johnny looked vindictive. Either way, it is one of the clearest, most painful examples of a guest crossing a line and paying permanently. The tragedy is they were genuinely close before this happened. Joan considered Johnny a real friend, and Johnny had put his reputation behind her by making her a regular guest host, which was basically Carson telling the industry that Joan Rivers was talented enough to do his job. Then she took a competing show without giving him proper notice. Was Joan wrong to take the Fox deal? Of course not. It was $10 million in her own show, but the way she handled it destroyed their relationship forever. What makes this historically significant is that it changed how late-night television worked. Before this, there was an unspoken understanding that Carson protégés would not directly compete with him. After this, the rules changed and late night became more cutthroat. Rivers spent years trying to apologize. She sent letters, reached out through mutual friends, publicly talked about missing him. Johnny Carson refused every attempt, would not read the letters, would not take calls, would not hear her name spoken. Joan Rivers died in 2014 without ever reconciling, because Johnny died in 2005 without ever speaking to her again. The last conversation they had was him hanging up. That is how 30 years of friendship ended, with a phone call and a dial tone and complete silence afterward. In hindsight, the whole thing feels like a waste. But that is the most disrespectful thing you can do in a relationship sometimes. Not the professional decision itself, but the permanent silence that follows. And both of them did it to each other in different ways. This feud became a cautionary tale in the entertainment industry about loyalty, mentorship, and the cost of ambition. This was the list of the biggest disrespectful guests Johnny Carson ever had on his show. Some of them paid the price with blacklists and ended friendships. Some of them got away with it because they were too big to cancel or because Johnny was complicit in the bit. But all of them crossed lines that Carson took very seriously, whether it was disrespecting the format, the staff, or Johnny himself personally. What we can learn from these cases is how power really worked in late-night television during the Carson era. The Tonight Show had rules, unspoken rules mostly, but rules nonetheless. And these guests broke them in ways that mattered, some deliberately, some accidentally. But all of them learned the same lesson eventually. You do not disrespect the host on his own show and walk away without consequences. Whether those consequences came immediately or years later, they always came eventually. These stories reveal the hidden dynamics of how television worked behind the scenes. Who do you think disrespected Johnny Carson the most? Was he right to cut people off permanently, or was he too harsh and vindictive? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into the wild and hidden moments of Tonight Show history, make sure you hit the subscribe button to support the channel.